Is data a blessing or a curse? Brought to you by Adastra, this is a must-listen podcast that inspires and advises people who are serious about digitalization.
Hello and welcome to the Adastra podcast. My name is Mark Cahoot and I lead the governance practice at Adastra, a global data, AI, and cloud systems integrator. We're coming to you today from Las Vegas at the occasion of AWS reInvent 2025. And joining me today is Chris Marcus Katz, AWS's Global Director of Automotive and Manufacturing. Chris Marcus is also known as CMK. You told me a story about how you got the nickname CMK.
Absolutely. So first of all, thanks for inviting me. I'm really excited. It's a vibrant time and very interesting time. And the reInvent is always so exciting as well when everyone comes together here. So thanks for having me. So the story behind CMK is actually that I was hired to AWS in 2016, and we hired a bunch of Christians, and Chris's. So when someone in the office said Chris, 10 people literally looked up.
Here.
So yes, and so we gave ourselves abbreviations, and mine stayed with me, and it became my brand. And even our CEO calls me CMK. So.
It seems to be an AWS leitmotif. You're accelerating everything, right? So
yes.
CMK is,
and we have a lot of abbreviations, and this is another one.
There we go. All right. So this one we'll keep in mind. So if I understand correctly, CMK, your dedicated business unit leads AWS's business with strategic original equipment manufacturers, OEMs, and specializes in the provisioning of reliable, scalable, and cost-effective cloud computing services. With your background in business information systems and more than 10 years of international sales and management roles at IBM, you bring deep experience of digital and cultural transformation to automotive and manufacturing clients like BMW Group, Mercedes-Benz, and Volkswagen. In any case, once again, I'm sure you have a very busy week at reInvent. It's going to be lots of sensory overload, no doubt, and stimulation. Yes. So thanks really for taking the time out to chat with us and to do this podcast.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Let's maybe start, as usual, at the helicopter level, 40,000 feet, right? And look and see what's unique about your work with clients in automotive and manufacturing verticals at AWS. So for listeners of our podcast who might not be familiar, can you share a little bit about how AWS supports these sectors and what you're focusing right now at 2025?
Actually, yeah, it's very interesting. So I can dive right into it here. So like when I mentioned when I was hired in 2016, we were building cloud services as AWS, horizontal cloud services for basically getting or running IT, but we didn't have an understanding on how do we work with the industry, like the manufacturing and the auto industry. So
the domain knowledge.
Yes, domain knowledge. So, and there's a big difference between OT and IT as well, right? Especially for the shop floor.
Yes.
So I was tasked and I was asked, could you figure out on how we talk to the industry, how we, what matters to them, what's important for them, and and what we have to build as AWS into our services to make it usable for the industry, right? That it makes sense. So, and since then we evolved. We've done a lot. We are co-developing with customers. Actually, how we work in Amazon, we call it working backwards. And what we do is actually, and this is also how Amazon functions, we actually we work with our leadership principles, and one of them is also customer obsession. And what it is about, firstly, you focus on the customer, but also you try to understand, in order to these companies, how they achieve their objectives, what needs to be done. And the conversations that we mostly have with them is not about the technology itself that comes later in the process, but rather which outcome do they want to generate, and how do they want to transform, what are their objectives. And then we work backwards from those objectives with them. Don't talk about technology at that point, because the technology then comes in later. And as we are, in nowadays, also with the age of GenAI, everything is almost solvable with technology. So it's rather, if you can pin down the business problem or the challenge and you make it really concrete, that's the starting point.
Right. So in fact, it sounds like you started doing that at AWS itself by meeting the customers where they are with becoming the sparring partner for the business even before technology comes into play as an enabler fundamentally.
They could use our cloud services without talking to us. Literally. I mean, that's how they build up, right? The services. So that's why we try to understand try to understand over the years, what are their requirements? What do they want to achieve? What's important for them?
And obsessive customer focus and working back from there.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Let's get into the specifics about technology-driven opportunities now that we understand the focus on business that players in the automotive segment are deploying, or at least wondering about deploying if they haven't taken the first steps yet, if they're acting as fast followers, a totally legitimate strategy, right? And how AWS is helping automotive leaders respond. I'd like to ask you, what 2 or 3 trends maybe are reshaping the segment right now, staying with business, and how are OEMs and suppliers using AWS to reinvent themselves?
Yes. You said something very important earlier. It's about partnering, actually. So we see ourselves not just as a supplier, not at all. We see ourselves as a partner. And actually, that's always the ultimate goal, to become the trusted advisor, right? Also to the industry. So that's how we see ourselves. So, and we're also in a constant learning mode. So we're never going to be done. The business is evolving, the industry is evolving. So we need to learn and also reinvent ourselves and how we work with them.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is that we partner up with them.
So together we're following a moving target.
Yes, because the challenges are so big in this transformation of the industry, you can't solve it alone, right?
Yes.
And it's about partnering with us, partnering with GSIs, with ISVs, everyone, the whole ecosystem actually needs to play together. So that's also a paradigm change that happened in the auto industry a few years ago. They still had the view on, you are the supplier, you need to just supply to us as an OEM.
Right.
But that has changed dramatically over the last years. And now they understood they need partnerships in the tech sector to innovate for their customers. And so it's an eye-to-eye conversation.
That must be radically different for people like engineers. Okay, so I'm stereotyping, but to go to a more, if you will, open mindset of finding best-of-breed solutions from wherever they come from, as opposed to a culture of, if it's not built here, it
not invented here. Absolutely.
Not invented here, exactly.
Yeah, that's a big change, and that also makes it sometimes, a bit challenging in starting the first discussions, because sometimes we don't even know the answer to the challenge and the problem that the customer has, because we're trying to figure it out together.
Right.
And as you asked on how we're partnering up with the industry and trends that I'm seeing, firstly, the auto industry is dramatically in a transformation also, because like you see it, the car becomes actually a smartphone on wheels.
Absolutely.
Okay,
right.
and an extension to your living room, basically. And that means that for sure, these OEMs like BMW and like Volkswagen and Porsche, they build incredible cars. They know how to do this very, very well. But what has changed is that actually it's about the customer experience. And that is the most important part, or becomes the most important part.
Right.
So it's about how you as a user, how you interact with the car, and the younger generations have a totally different kind of requirements to the car itself than, for instance, like, someone who's a little bit more experienced in life, I would say, in regards to wants to drive a car. So, and even if you look to like Asia, they have a totally different set of requirements as well. So this is why we thought, also from, we talk about AWS, but also coming from an Amazon perspective, we think that we have understood how a digital customer experience looks like and how it works. That's at least what we think, and that combined with that the auto industry, can build great cars and can scale in terms of production.
Yes,
that goes hand in hand, and that's the inflection point where these two things come together: digitalization and as well doing it at scale.
It sounds, CMK, it sounds very collaborative and multidisciplinary, because we're not talking about a discrete value chain of chunks here by the sounds of things, but we're talking about customer focus, right? Understanding of preferences across different demographics, psychographics, etc., expectations of what a car actually is, which is then going to influence product design well before we ever get to the shop floor.
Yes. Yeah. The entire value chain actually is impacted by this, so what the customers are expecting on the one hand side, but also then, that goes downstream through the whole value chain on, that changes the design process, that changes the production process, so, and also the entire life cycle of a car it becomes totally different than it was in the past.
So now we've given the Harvard Business Review case study on change in the automotive sector.
Absolutely.
Let's get to the actual use cases. Tell us, how is AI, GenAI, and agentic AI actually being deployed to production in the automotive segment these days?
So. In multiple ways, let's separate the product itself, the car, and the process side.
Okay.
And it's happening, on both sides actually. But in the car, the car becomes the companion. Actually, so not just a smartphone on wheels, what I said earlier, but now the car really becomes the companion. And for instance, like BMW did that really well, and how they positioned the Neue Klasse.
Yes,
well, it becomes the companion of the driver, and it's also going to be proactive. So the car is in the future with GenAI, is anticipating. Actually what you're going to do next and where you're going.
Trying to remember the Neue Klasse branding. There's something about the new soul or the new heart or soul of the...
It was actually on how they positioned it a few years ago here in Las Vegas, and how they presented it.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, you're back full circle.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And we're talking about these paradigm changes, and your career is a paradigm change, as I've understood, spanning underlying technologies from mainframes to today's agentic AI. And with AI, I'd like to turn to, and we were just discussing this before we turned the cameras on, to the challenges faced when automotive customers move beyond pilots to production, right, to actually hitting the business process. What are you finding among your clients is important and challenging when deploying, for example, AI, right, the frontier technologies to live business processes? What are the key elements that enable this deployment and make it possible? Things like the data itself, governance, and the all-important culture changes and mindset changes.
Yeah, let me just come back a bit on how that GenAI is actually being deployed in the product and the process side, and
please.
I'm going to take it from there. So we have on the one hand side the product side in terms of how GenAI is going to be used in the car, and also how the car is going to interact with you and how you interact with the car. That's the one side. So for instance, automakers, just like BMW, for instance, deployed Alexa Plus within the Neue Klasse. So that is basically that side. But then also full circle here, I started my career in mainframe, and actually it was always these mainframes. In order to do an IT transformation as a whole and to reinvent processes and to build microservices, you need to untangle what's on the mainframe, because the mainframe is really a monolith.
Yes.
And an IT transformation wouldn't be done or achieved without resolving the mainframe.
Run books.
Exactly. And most of the developers don't exist anymore, or they're not within the company. The code is not documented. all
tribal knowledge.
Stuff.
Yeah.
And this is now, this is actually, these mainframe projects almost seemed impossible because they would be multiple years, 10, 15 years processes, projects, and very, very costly. So nobody was really touching it. On the one hand side, out of anxiety, that because core processes run on the mainframe of those companies, even
we can't
today,
move.
We can't. No, don't touch it. Don't touch it. And but now with GenAI, actually, when GenAI, started a few years ago and now got into software development, where software development is going to be automated. And now we're seeing, and we just announced this during this week with the AWS Transform, you could actually automate the mainframe offloading, so refactoring code. That's massive. That's going to be a massive transformation. And this is also then, where it comes full circle, like these automakers or the manufacturing companies that we work with who have mainframes can actually now really do the transformation that they want to do, to untangle the processes on the mainframe, to rethink the business processes, and to build them new with GenAI. And you come from multiple years of projects, come to maybe a month or even within a year. We will see the results soon on that, but it's really, really exciting. And this is where GenAI comes into play, actually.
Sounds like you're on the vanguard of refactoring mainframe code in many ways and mainframe data, and that must be applicable to other legacy industries as well.
Absolutely.
That have built themselves around these monoliths, around these very powerful things, but very inflexible things.
And GenAI is going to change a lot. We don't know where it's going to lead, by the way. There's no, you cannot predict the future at the moment. You got to take it step by step, which is on the one hand side, it's very exciting, but it also, people are anxious also about it because roles are going to change, how companies operate. It's going to, is going to change, and for instance, like knowledge. There was a study, I don't know where it was, but where the study was published that actually knowledge lasted like 5 to 10 years, if like decades back. That has reduced dramatically over the last years to like a few years. Yes. And now, with GenAI, actually, because the profiles are changing, knowledge actually, the time gets even shorter about how long knowledge will last. And what GenAI also does is and that's what I hear, these companies talk about, is actually that they want to get the knowledge that some workers have, very specific knowledge, get into the algorithms, that the algorithms can do it by themselves, the agents.
Yes.
So the profiles are going to change on how we work and interact.
Absolutely. And I think that probably puts great demands on OCM, on change management, on bringing people along through these transformations. But as I'm listening to you, I just want to add to the list that we started enumerating in terms of how AI is changing things. We talked about the product. We talked about the process. We talked about the customer influence being the start and the end of product design. But what you've introduced also is agility and flexibility in the information architecture. We often talk about, the foundations that you need for GenAI. It sounds like we've got another feedback loop going in to changing legacy information architectures, which is then changing the business architecture.
I think, it's, Matt Garman mentioned it in one of the articles, actually, and I fully agree with him on this one. Actually, critical thinking, the skill of critical thinking becomes more and more important in the future, because
knowing how to forget and to learn, relearn.
Exactly. And to look at something, I mean, even today I use GenAI every day. With the tool that we have internally, it's like a quick suite, and I love it. I do everything. If it could unload my dishwasher, I would even use it for that, but it doesn't work yet. But
hope springs eternal.
Maybe we'll see the robots doing that in the future. But it's and if you then generate something and you read through it, actually. I caught myself in that I read through it, and because I trust the algorithm, but I said, does that make sense? What is what the output is? Just does it make sense? And this is the critical thinking that we need.
Profound implications at yet another level. We just keep adding to them by the sounds of it. It sounds to me that that we're talking, CMK, about very large organizations, yes, with global scale, and really at the top of the manufacturing game and scale. But let's drill down a little bit more on company size, because I imagine that your vertical doesn't just deal with Fortune 500, the world's top manufacturers, but also mid-market or Mittelstand manufacturers. From what you've seen, how does AI adoption and the AI journey differ for the biggest OEMs, tier 1, tier 2 sort of suppliers? You know what I mean, in terms of different sizes. Is it the same journey, or does it look different?
It's actually the same journey.
Okay.
Because that's maybe the beauty. I haven't thought about that in that perspective, but if I think about it, it actually, the size of your business doesn't matter in terms of using and deploying AI.
The great equalizer.
It's rather about how you as a company embrace and how you think about it to use it. Okay. Because for sure in those large corporations, I mean, you have to set boundaries, on how it's going to use, how it's introduced, also from an organizational and cultural level to do this. And maybe you can do things quicker, even in smaller business, because the owner takes a decision, or, whoever. So that might be even faster and more pragmatic. But I haven't seen a different pattern between SMB or small, medium businesses and large businesses.
Yeah, absolute enterprise grade. Yeah. My next question for you was going to be about the innovation power of AI, but it strikes me that we've been talking about nothing else than the innovation power that it brings and the organizational implications. I'm curious if you'd like to highlight any other particularly innovative projects or use cases where AWS is helping drive change in manufacturing.
Actually, when we started to talk to the industry and work with them, we went from, let's take an example of the auto industry for a second. It's like we said, okay, the car becomes actually software-driven, so SDV, software-defined vehicles. And actually, we learned together with the automakers on what that means, actually. We had an idea what SDV kind of means, and they had an idea, but we learned together on what it really is. So we built actually then the framework for this as terms of solutions, and also incorporate that into a service that was kind of a co-development, what we did with the industry. And we came from the car side. Then another obvious area is autonomous driving.
Yes.
Actually, this becomes, I think that's going to be boosted as well with GenAI and the possibilities that we see. Because if you think about the early projects in autonomous driving, for instance, I remember, and I won't say the name, but one of the automakers said that in 2018, they said in 2020, the cars will go autonomous, which obviously it didn't happen, because the reason being is you need a lot of compute and storage as well at scale.
Right.
And that wasn't available at that time in that kind of size, or it was really expensive, let's put it like that, for the project. And we then worked with the industry on how we could solve that puzzle together, actually. So we also, in terms of the reference project, we built the autonomous driving platform together with BMW for the industry, for instance, to solve that, and how you do this in the most cost-effective way. Then, the next transformational area where I see what's going to happen in the industry is actually the shop floor.
Okay.
The shop floor is the heartbeat of the manufacturers for sure, and as well of the automakers itself, right? That's the core process, but nobody really wanted to touch it, because if we all know, what happens if the shop floor doesn't work, if the production doesn't work, they don't sell anything. So it has a direct impact. So in terms of culture change and projects, nobody actually wants to touch these processes and these systems. But with GenAI, actually, it gives us totally new capabilities in terms of looking at MES, SCADA systems, and how to augment them or how to rebuild them. OT, yes. And that's going to be the next transformational area for the industry. And actually, this is where we also, as AWS, are really excited about, because we have our own production, and I'm explain it real quick, because for sure you look on the outside, you look to AWS or Amazon, you say Amazon, that's the retailer, the big retailer. And everyone knows what you can buy there, but actually our fulfillment centers is our production,
right?
And
logistics optimization,
everything, and running really the shop floor. I mean, like how from an order to packaging to sending, that's really a production at scale, and we do this globally. And the beauty of the things is it runs completely on AWS. So it's always so energizing, or I think, it's like when we took the OEMs or the manufacturers to our fulfillment centers. And one of the first questions then is, okay, where's the server room? There's no server room. It's operated fully out of the cloud. And there's a big change going on in terms of also the perception, because, a few years back, everyone was saying you can't run a shop floor out of the cloud. What, if you have no connectivity, or it doesn't work, or whatever, then production doesn't work. So that discussion has completely changed.
It's silent now, isn't it? Yeah,
completely changed.
Fascinating. I've never thought of AWS or Amazon as a manufacturer, but that's compelling, and I'm sure it enables you to have much more peer-to-peer discussions with the partners.
Also, and like I said, and you can maybe see it. I'm very passionate about it. It's like, and we're learning. We're a learning organization. We're never done innovating. We have, what we call within Amazon a day one mindset, which means we ask ourselves each and every day, are we still doing the right thing and in the right way? So that is kind of an innovative mindset and an entrepreneurial mindset that we have. So, and what I learned the other day was I knew about our fulfillment centers and what we do, but actually, and now what you see with the AWS and reInvent, you see these GenAI announcements coming out, there's a lot going on. But actually what we do, we use AI within the company since already 20 years, ML and AI, but think about the robots that work in our fulfillment centers, produce data on a daily basis, and it's massive. And we use all of the data to train the models. And by training them at such a scale, this is something that we then externalize with our models, and as well, with our GenAI services, which we provide to the industry. So now, if you have that shop floor discussion again, we, on the one hand side, we understand what are the challenges. Somehow, we're not building cars in that perspective, or we're not producing machinery, but we understand in some way how production is being done at scale, on the one hand side, and on the other hand, on how you could use AI and GenAI actually.
CMK, I accuse you of thinking in synergies.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's fascinating because we've woven three discussions together. We've talked about changes to the value chain. We've talked about changes in mindset, day one mindset, blank piece of paper thinking, and the need for critical thinking as a core driver of innovation, and the partnership approach of learning together with your clients. And because we at Adastra are an AWS partner, before I let you go and before we run out of time, let me just take a second and talk about the fact that, in this ecosystem, in this rich ecosystem, AWS doesn't work alone, right? No. It's an ecosystem of partners and SIs like Adastra. I'd like to ask your practitioner's view of what role consulting partners play in helping automotive clients execute complex programs on AWS. What qualities or strengths do you look for in your SI or ISV partners when you're approaching the automotive segment?
That's a very good question, and also a very good statement. So first of all, we'll really like partnering up with Adastra on a lot of things. Like for instance, like in my segment, like ABB, we work together at ABB, but also in the other customers, so we work together. So, and it doesn't work alone. That's what I said earlier. It needs to be partners in the ecosystem who work closely together to actually solve industry challenges or to work, for a joint customer. So it works together. What I'm looking for, first of all, our customers always take the decision. It's never that we as AWS, we would recommend a partner, for instance, or if the customer asks us for an opinion, we for sure, provide a list or an opinion, but in the end, always the customer decides. And what when I look at Adastra and also others, what we do is we need to take the horizontal approach for the industry. And for sure, we have many verticals also within AWS, not just the auto and manufacturing vertical, but also the other verticals where we work for other industries. And the beauty of partnering up is, like companies with Adastra, when you have specific knowledge for a specific domain or an industry, and you do this really well and you focus on this, that is then complementary what we do as a platform in that perspective, and also building technology for sure. And that goes hand in hand. And together then we provide actually the value for the customer.
Better together.
Absolutely. Better together.
CMK, I think we're out of time for today. So, but let me just express many thanks for taking the time out of a busy week, for sharing your experience in enabling auto manufacturers to transform their businesses through partnership. I hope that you have a rich week here in Las Vegas at reInvent 2025. And I'd really like it if you were to come back in a few years and tell us about what the shop floor now looks like, because my mind is thinking that it's going to be nothing like what we see today. So again, big thanks for being with us. And to our audience today, thank you for being with us. If your team wants a low-risk first step in your AI business transformation, reach out to Adastra and let's make it happen together. And as always, if you found this podcast useful, you know what to do. Like and subscribe. So long for now from Las Vegas.